All right, ever stop and think about this? We spend so much time and money on therapy, on self help books, endlessly scrolling, all trying to figure out the meaning of life. And then you look over and your cat is just completely blissed out napping in a patch of sun. What's up with that? Let's get into it. I mean, it's a huge paradox, isn't it? We humans are on this never ending and, let's be honest, often really painful search for happiness, for purpose. But cats? They seem to have it all figured out, and they don't even seem to be trying. They're not exactly reading self-help books, but they look more content than most of us.
So this whole thing leads to a pretty wild idea from the political philosopher John Gray. What if our greatest achievement, philosophy, this whole search for meaning, what if it's actually our biggest mistake? In his book, Feline Philosophy, he basically uses cats as a mirror to show us how tied up and anxious we are. And when you look at it this way, the difference is just stark. We're tangled up in existential dread, and they're just living.
So we're diving into what Gray calls the feline paradox, and he kicks it off with this really mind-bending question. What if a cat's biggest strength isn't that it has some secret wisdom, but that it doesn't need any wisdom or philosophy in the first place? Okay, so here's the absolute core of his argument. We humans, we're so proud of our self-consciousness, right? This ability to think about ourselves, our past, our future. Gray comes along and says, nope, that's not a gift. He argues it's the source of our anxiety. It's the very thing that makes us unhappy and cuts us off from that simple, natural contentment that you see in a cat. And this brings us to this idea he calls a curse called I. Think about it. That feeling of self, the thing we believe makes us so special, Gray says it's actually this huge, heavy burden. It's that I that gets imposter syndrome, that I that scrolls through Instagram and feels terrible, that I that has to build up this whole fragile identity and then defend it all the time. He really drives this point home with this quote, "Our mind is not a reward, but a curse." He actually connects our self-awareness all the way back to the story of Adam and Eve. When they ate the fruit from the tree of knowledge, they didn't just get smart, they got self-aware. And what came right after? Shame, anxiety, hiding. Gray's point is that this gift of consciousness is a curse we can never give back. Okay, so how do scientists even test for this? Well, there's this famous experiment called the mirror test. It's actually pretty clever. An animal gets a little colored spot put on its body somewhere it can't see directly, like its forehead. Then you stick it in front of a mirror. The big question is, does it see the spot in the mirror and then touch the spot on its own body? And here's the big reveal. Cats fail the test. They just don't seem to recognize that the cat in the mirror is them. Now, a scientist might just jot that down as a cognitive limitation, but for John Gray, he calls this a victory. Think about it. Not having a concept of self means you're free from all the anxiety, all the stories, all the baggage we attach to our own identities. It's a kind of freedom that's almost impossible for us to even wrap our heads around. Okay, so this lack of self completely changes the game when it comes to happiness, which brings us to what Gray calls the happiness delusion. For us humans, happiness is this thing we're always chasing. It's a goal, right? A destination. For a cat, it's not something to be found. It's just their default setting. It's the state they automatically return to as soon as any stress or danger is gone. I mean, think about it. For literally centuries, from the ancient Stoics to the Epicureans, our smartest thinkers have been desperately trying to find a formula for inner peace, what they called ataraxia. And yet, as the philosopher Montaigne basically asked, after all that searching, where is it? We're still looking for the map. And this is where Gray's argument gets really brutal for a lot of philosophy. He basically says you can't think your way to happiness. It's a total dead end. Why? Because so much of our life is just random chance, and our feelings, well, they come from our bodies, not from some grand logical plan we cook up in our heads. Which brings us to maybe the biggest difference of all, a life without fear. It really boils down to one single massive thing. We know we're going to die, and that knowledge, that obsession, shapes everything we do. A cat, though? It just lives in the eternal now, totally free from that constant nagging dread. The philosopher Blaise Pascal actually had a name for this whole human condition. He called it diversion. His idea was that pretty much everything we do, our work, our hobbies, binge-watching shows, you name it, is really just a complicated scheme to distract ourselves from one unbearable thought, that we exist and one day we won't. And man, doesn't that just hit close to home? That late night doom scrolling, burying yourself in work, constantly needing to have plans. Pascal would say that's all just us running away. We're running from having even a single quiet moment alone with our thoughts because deep down we're scared of what's waiting for us in the silence. And then you look at a cat. The contrast is just wow. A cat doesn't need Netflix. It doesn't need a 5-year plan or a political ideology. When it's done with its business, it just sleeps. It's perfectly content just being. Why? Because it has no self that it needs to escape from.
So, if we were to try and bottle up all this feline wisdom and turn it into a guide for us anxious humans, what would that even look like? Well, that's exactly how Gray wraps up his book, with his 10 rules for living.
All right, let's run through what he playfully calls the 10 Commandments of Catholicism. And fair warning, some of these are pretty provocative. Number 1, stop trying to persuade humans to be rational. It's a lost cause. 2, don't go around complaining that you're unfulfilled. 3, don't look for some deep meaning in your suffering. Sometimes pain is just pain. 4, it is way better to be indifferent to other people than to feel like you're forced to love them. 5, forget about chasing happiness, and maybe, just maybe, you'll actually find it. 6, your life is not a story. It doesn't need a neat beginning, middle, and end. 7, don't be afraid of the dark, literally or metaphorically. 8, sleep for the pure pleasure of sleeping, not just to recharge. 9, and this is a huge one, be very, very wary of anyone who promises they can make you happy. And finally, number 10, if you try all this and you just can't learn to live like a cat, then just go back to the human world of diversion. Accept it. And that's really the final big question he leaves us with. It's a challenging idea, right? Maybe even a little bit bleak. It suggests that this whole human quest for meaning is the very thing making us miserable. So if you can't live like a cat, is the human world of distraction all that's left? It's a tough question. Is it better to keep chasing a peace we might never find? Or should we just accept who we are and, find a better show to binge?